Let's take a look at the top 10 graded Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh cards in my collection. Alright, what is up everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, as I mentioned in the intro, we are going to take a look at the top 10 graded Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh cards in my personal collection. And what better way to start it off than with the original Dark Magician. So this is actually the Dark Magician that was featured in the first ever Yu-Gi-Oh expansion, Volume 1. This was the only instance, in like the OG like first appearance cards where you could actually pull the SDY artwork from a booster pack. Obviously in English we got this artwork in the starter deck product, which was like a prearranged, draw where you knew that you were going to get the holo that was presented on the front, whereas in Volume 1 you actually could pursue the card as the primary chase within the expansion, which I think is super special, and it adds a little bit to the mystique of the card itself. You'll notice that this card is actually in a different type of slab, so this is by a company called ARS. It's a Japanese grading company. It's a really nice label, like it's etched metal instead of just like some shoddy piece of paper. But obviously, like, it shows the grade on the back and the label itself is on the bottom. So I know that this isn't for everybody. I'm not like converting all of my graded cards to ARS or whatever. I just happen to get a particularly good deal on this at an extremely discounted rate compared to a PSA 9. As you can see, based on this card itself, like, we're OC for sure. That happens a ton on Series 1 Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Series 1 being like no set designator or Eye of Anubis at the bottom. So you can use that to kind of differentiate like the first print of cards versus like a later reprint from Series 2 or onward. So really awesome card. I also love how these Series 1 cards have a more traditional or like more anime-esque layout and also extended artwork. If we take a look at an English card, which I happen to have one nearby, you can see that if we line up the card's artwork, there's actually less to see on the English card compared to the Japanese one. So the picture is actually slightly larger on the Japanese card, and then obviously the text box and attack box on the bottom look a lot more similar to what we saw in the anime versus the English release of the cards. So very awesome stuff there, but yeah, Series 1 cards do tend to be off-center. Another common defect on Series 1 cards is like, in Pokemon we know it as silvering. In Yu-Gi-Oh sometimes they call it frame glittering, or at least that's the translation from Japanese. So that's pretty common. There is none on my copy, which is pretty fortunate. And there's a peak at the centering on the back and a little white nick at the top. So I would say that this is pretty deserving of a 9, but I was actually able to secure this for the last sold price of a PSA 7. So pretty special, and I'm super happy to have the original Dark Magician inside of my collection. Alright, so coming on up to number 9, a lot of the cards that you're about to see are in a relatively similar price range. A lot of these kind of hang out in that like $350 to $500 price range comfortably. I value some of them more than that, which is why I'm not selling them. Or in other instances, I have like multiple copies. I also just kind of like these cards and don't have a ton of incentive to sell it when I can, offload Pokemon all day. But anyway, here is the only other 9 that you will see in the video, and this is my Ghost Rare Stardust Dragon. I think that I've shown this card off on the channel in the past. It's a really, really iconic card from the 5Ds era of Yu-Gi-Oh, which is, I guess, not one that a ton of people would know about in the surface level of Yu-Gi-Oh. But the 5Ds era is kind of akin to like the Diamond and Pearl era or Black and White era in Pokemon. So there's a little bit of like that mid-generation. But obviously the Stardust Dragon is the Blue Eyes of that era, I think it's safe to say. And then Ghost Rare was like the flashy new rarity available in the card game. I have graded, I think, 2 or 3 PSA 9s at this time. I have not secured a 10 of this card, although that would be absolutely fantastic. I figured since I've graded so many 9s, and it is a pretty sweet card, I am pretty safe to keep one for my personal collection. This one, though, I'm not sure if it has shown up at all, but this one does actually have like a blemish on the slab somewhere in this area. There's a scratch, so that's kind of a bummer, but again, it's just a PC card, so if I want to get it recased, once I amass enough cards that need a reholder, I'll just send that one off with them. Alright, moving on up to number 8, we have the PSA 10 Air Neos Ultimate Rare. So I particularly love these GX era ultis, and you're going to see quite a few of them coming up, spoiler alert, but these GX era ultis are like insanely less expensive compared to their English counterpart. So just a quick rundown of like the Japanese ultis. Yeah, they're way easier to pull compared to like a, Series 2 ulti, which you might see later on in the video. It's about the same difficulty to pull as an English card, although it's pretty generally considered that there was more Japanese boxes printed at the time of release compared to their English counterparts. So that kind of has to do with the price discrepancy, but in my opinion, the discrepancy between pricing is still a bit extreme because a lot of these cards that you're going to see, first of all, are much less liquid in Japanese, so they sell less often, so less repeated sales. But generally, it's like 1/5 to 1/10 of the price of their English counterparts. So a card like this in English is going to be, several $1,000s. I would be, surprised if this one sold for any more than like $350 or $375. As a matter of fact, at Charlotte Collecticon, I sold my spare copy of this for a trade plus cash deal valued at around $375. So I know that that's kind of the going rate for something like this. So kind of crazy. Now, in terms of foiling as well, I do not have any English Ultimate Rares handy, but usually the foiling of Japanese cards is much better than the North American Ultimate Rares. And sometimes it's on par with the EU versions, which are generally considered to be a bit better than NA printings. So not only are you getting the same rarity and same character for like a steal of a price compared to the English counterpart, but you're usually getting a more superior foiling compared to the North American printing, which is most common. All right, moving along from there, we have the card that I actually pulled myself from my Enemy of Justice booster box on the channel not too long ago, but here's Elemental Hero Phoenix Enforcer. This is an absolutely insane card. I mean, if you're looking at the texture of this guy, you can kind of just see why it's so easy to fall in love with. When you get like the embossed foil on the wings and stuff on each feather just really standing out. Really, really awesome card. And this obviously is the counterpart or the foil to the main character's original Ace Monster in the GX era. So very awesome card, and I'm super happy that I pulled that one myself, though I will note that the centering on the back is a little bit shifty. But if you've graded with PSA before, you know that they're a lot more lenient on centering on the back compared to the front. So that is my PSA 10 Elemental Hero Phoenix Enforcer. All right, I'm kind of losing track of where we're at on the list. Let me check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we've hit 4. This would be number 5 on the list. We have Elemental Hero Shining Flare Wingman. So this card, I believe I have this copy actually listed on eBay. For now, I'm considering it PC, but I mean, I'd also probably be okay with subbing this out for just a 9, which I've graded several of. But Elemental Hero Shining Flare Wingman. Sorry if I said Shining Phoenix Enforcer earlier. Hopefully I didn't, but that's a card that exists. Anyway, this is one of the more iconic GX era Ultimate Rares. Obviously, this is the cover card of Elemental Energy, so that's pretty popular. And then also it did see play in the anime by Jaden, the main character. Super sick card. I would value this somewhere around like the upper range of 350 to 500, probably around like that 450 range. Just super, super cool artwork there. I'm like hit or miss with the foiling on this card. Like sometimes it really slaps for me, and then other times it's just, I kind of view it as mid. I do like that there's good contrast between just like flat foiling versus the embossed texture. I think that makes the card like stand out very well. Another card that shows that off decently is Elemental Hero Tempest, which is probably my favorite or most nostalgic card from the GX era, because I actually pulled that one when I was a kid, although I only have a 9 currently, so that unfortunately did not make the top 10 list. But chugging right along, I believe this is number 4. We have the Ancient Gear Golem. So I did recently grade this card. So there's a little bit of recency bias probably. I'm not sure exactly what this one would transact for, but I would personally value this somewhere in like the mid-range, probably at about $400 to $450. Just an amazing card, and for me personally, the chase of this was surreal. It took me forever to find a decent raw copy of this card, and I ended up hitting a 10 on my first submission of it, which was pretty special, because a lot of these cards that you're seeing PSA 10s of, I have graded a lot of copies. So some of them I've been lucky and hit duplicate 10s, others, I got 110 and just kept it, because I was afraid to try to continue chasing it. But some of these things are pretty difficult to source good raw copies of, and if you look at the populations of Japanese Ultimate Rares, specifically, or Japanese cards of this nature, you'll actually see pretty inflated population numbers, particularly some of the cards towards the end of my list. However, I believe that the case is that just a lot of the clean raw copies have already been graded, because a lot of this stuff, it's super difficult to source in good, like, tenable condition. But the pops wouldn't make you believe that. The population reports actually are a little bit deceiving in that manner, in my opinion, because they make it present as though OCG just is like super easy to source and grade. But from my experience, having graded hundreds of Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh cards, it can be pretty difficult to grade some of the good stuff. So, all right, moving right along. Here we have the Cyber Dragon. So this is another card that I recently graded, a really ridiculous PSA 10. If you know anything about like the mid-generation GX era lore or whatever, then you know that Cybernetic Revolution in general was like one of the most opened expansions from the GX era. partially because this card was so playable and still is today, which makes this ultimate rare extremely difficult to find raw, unless you're willing to pay up, to basically the PSA 10 price for it. But this is a card that I would definitely value at the higher end of my range, probably in the 450 to 500 territory. I do believe that a couple copies have transacted on eBay in the last few months, so you can always check out sold listings for that, but I believe they sold within the $500 range, and I would not let go of this one for less than that, in my opinion. So, pretty sick card. Again, pretty difficult to source in good raw condition because of how playable it was and still is to this day. Obviously, we know that Yu-Gi-Oh! Does not have a set rotation, so every card ever printed, as long as it's not in the banned or forbidden list, is still up for grabs in terms of creating a deck, which means that copies of this card are still being used today overseas. Pretty ridiculous to think about, but it is what it is. Okay, so now we're breaking into the top 3. Number 3, we have Elemental Hero Flame Wingman. So I referenced this card earlier as the original ace monster of the protagonist in the GX anime, Jaden. This is it. Like, this is the monster he used most. I know that, for example, in the 25th anniversary tins, where they're like going through all the most iconic monsters or whatever, I believe they attributed Elemental Hero Neos, or whatever it is, to be his ace monster. And sure, later in the anime that may very well be the case, but for the bulk of the series, Flame Wingman was his guy. And this card was so cool in the anime. Obviously, like, I don't know, pretty cool fusion monster. Like, at this point in time, before the GX type series, fusion monsters were absolute duds, and the Elemental Heroes really, like, brought fusions into the scene, or into, like, the territory of relevance for Yu-Gi-Oh! Players. And the card itself is just absolutely sick. If you actually look at, like, the North American or European print, the foiling stamp is going to be so much different compared to the Japanese version. I believe the same is true for Asian and English. I think the Japanese OCG is pretty exclusive in terms of this foiling stamp. Not that it's like better or worse than all of them, it's just distinctly different. And so if you're really going for like the different examples of the foil, then this is a must-have for your collection. So pretty sick, and I was actually fortunate enough to grade 2 of those. Since it is the ace monster of the main character in the series, I would certainly value that towards the $500 range. I do have a spare copy of that card that I have not listed on eBay because I believe that it is a little bit too cheap at that price point, but it is what it is. So the next 2 cards are going to be absolute heaters. Again, these are the types of cards that you would see the population report for and think to yourself, oh, those must not be super difficult to grade. But if you spend any time trying to source good raw copies, you'll know that that is absolutely not the case. We have our first Series 2 Ultimate Rare. This is my PSA 10 Gemini Elf. So as you can see, the artwork itself is a little bit different from what we received in English. I'll go ahead and try to focus this a little bit better. So obviously this is the uncensored artwork. In English we received just a version of this card that has a little bit less personality, obviously. Looks like we're still not focused. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so yeah, certainly a different take on the artwork compared to what we received in Labyrinth of Nightmare in English. A much more, bold statement piece, if you pick up my drift. But yeah, this is pretty sick. Obviously, Gemini Elf was a super popular monster in terms of just like the beatdown style of play, because you have a 4-star monster, requires no tributes for 1900 attack. That takes out basically all of the big beatdown monster 4-stars at the time, including Lejin. Obviously, we have Mechanical Chaser, stuff like that, Neo. So Gemini Elf really came in clutch and set a higher precedent for what beatdown monsters could be capable of. So that's pretty awesome. Just a wonderful card in general. I would value that. I think I had this one listed on my eBay for like $1,200 or something. Probably not worth that much, but I probably wouldn't sell mine for like less than $750 or so. And even that feels a little bit cheap, but relative to what the market is today, that's probably about where I would deem it fair. So pretty sick card on that. And let's get to our last card of the day. If you know anything about my collection, or you see some of the PSA returns that I choose to highlight on the channel, then you probably know what's coming. But we have my ultimate rare Summon Skull in PSA 10. So this is the chase card from Struggle of Chaos, an absolutely insane card. Obviously, Summon Skull, goes without saying, is one of the most iconic monsters. Speaking of beatdown style decks, Summon Skull is like the original boss monster of the beatdown deck. So pretty sick to see that I have two of that type of card at my disposal in PSA 10, in an exclusive to Japanese rarity. We did not ever receive Gemini Elf or Summon Skull in this rarity in English to this date. And then obviously with Series 2, we have that closer to anime layout. It's a little bit different from Series 1. I will go ahead and pull out my Dark Magician just to highlight this, because I always try to give this information to people so that they can distinguish different cards from the original original OCG days. But this is a Series 2 card. We can tell because it says SC11 down here, which is like the set code, and then this little square at the bottom is called the Eye of Anubis. It looks like my focus is just all over the place right now, so I may have too many things in frame. But again, the little box in the corner is referred to as the Eye of Anubis. And then we also have the set code here, which tells us it's from Struggle of Chaos, card number 51. Now, a Series 1 card has no set code, so it doesn't tell you what expansion this is from, and then also there's no Eye of Anubis. So those are the two big distinguishing factors. Another one at a glance, if you're really like trying to find out the differences, you can tell based on the text boxes. So although they both look a lot more similar to the anime, you can see the Dark Magician's actual flavor text is much smaller than the Summon Skulls. And that's also a big distinguishing difference between Series 1 versus Series 2. So if for some reason the set code and the Eye of Anubis are not big enough indicators, you can also check out the text boxes and you'll see your difference there too. So very awesome stuff. And that is my top 10 Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And with that, we are all done going through the top 10 graded Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh cards in my personal collection. It has been an absolute blast accumulating these cards and other cards like them that didn't quite make the list. Obviously, none of them are like of insane value immediately, and a lot of these cards, if I were to sell them, would be much less liquid than certainly Pokemon or even English Yu-Gi-Oh! However, I have graded 9 out of the 10 of the cards that made the top list, and that itself has been pretty special, and I think that continuing to chase cards of this nature is just a blast because, one, it's not super expensive unless I have to end up acquiring an insane quantity of cards to hit a 10. But in most cases, you don't dig yourself in too big of a hole chasing something like this, and that's definitely one of the factors that keeps me pushing through. But yeah, overall, this has been an absolutely fun journey to be taking part in. Definitely one of the more fun things that I've collected over the course of time, and it's breaking the bank a lot less than most Pokemon things have for me in the past. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you also learned a little something about Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and with that, I hope to see you on the next one.